Let's crack on. My name is Sienna Rasmussen, and I'm a Business Development Director from Impero. And with me today, I have Morten Christensen, and we're going to spend the next half an hour to give you a demo of the entire Impero platform. So before we get started, we will just quickly introduce ourselves, talk you through the agenda, and then we'll show you the environment. So Morten, perhaps you want to introduce yourself.
I can do so. Hi everyone, my name is Morten Christensen. I'm heading our customer success department, meaning that I have the responsibilities for all of our current clients, all of the onboarding process, all of our support as well. So essentially, I know a lot about all the small details about Impero, and I'll also be the one guiding you through today.
Thank you, Morten. And as for myself, I am, as I said, a business development director at Impero, focusing on the sales activities across the UK and the Nordic countries. I bring a decade of experience from the professional services industry, where my focus and interest has always been heavily weighted towards risk management and internal controls. So whether it was in the capacity of being a finance accountant, owning the risk, performing the controls, whether it was being a consultant, building the risk and control frameworks, or even being an auditor, basically assessing and auditing the risk and controls. It has always been very apparent that the risks and controls should be a very ingrained and embedded part of the processes to basically ensure successful and effective risk management. So that's essentially what we will be focusing on for the webinar today. As I was saying in the beginning, we will be showcasing the entire platform, so you have the opportunity to see both our risk management module, our control management module, and our reporting module, as well as you will also get a bit of insights into our user administration. Throughout the webinar, you have the opportunity to ask questions. We will address them as we go along, and we will also hold time at the end for any questions that may remain. So let's just get started. And Morten, if you could show us what Impero looks like.
Yes, I can do so. Thank you for that, Sienna. And as Sienna mentioned, please feel free to ask any questions as we go along. We're a bit on a tight schedule today, but I'll see if we can ask them as we go. Otherwise, we'll reach out to you with the answers afterwards. First off, I have now entered the grand entrance of Impero. For this case here, we're just using our webinar environment. The reason for us starting here is that, well, just want to note that in Impero we have two different kinds of users. So we have the admins. This is mainly the focus that we'll have today. This is the ones that will sign into Impero, who can create new risks, who can create new controls, and can pull reporting from within Impero as well. So essentially, the majorities of the topics that we'll be going through today. That being said, we'll also touch very briefly about the second kinds of users, the contributors that we have. So this will be the ones that might assess the risk, or are to perform a control. You might interact with Impero in a slightly different way, but I'll get a bit back to that. So first off, I'll sign in here using my username and password. It's also possible. We also support single sign-on, and if you have external parties joining in outside of your AD, then it's also possible to add a two-factor authentication, so you get a PIN code. I don't have that enabled here in this environment here, so I'll just go straight to Impero. What I see here is basically all the different areas that I have access to. So here we can see there's something within finance, something within tax, something within IT, and so on here as we see. This is actually mostly for showcase purposes, but also to tell that it might be that some within your company need access to all these different kinds of different business areas, but the majority might only need access to actually one or maybe a few control programs. So it could be that, well, I only have access to financial controls, whereas Sienna has access to all the ones regarding tax. Well, that means that when I enter in Impero, then I will only be able to see this financial controls program, whereas if Sienna enters Impero, all she would be able to see are the 3 tax-related programs. So you would basically at all times only be presented with data that you have actively been granted access to. I'll talk a little bit about that later as well. As we already discussed, we will be touching upon 3 to 4 different parts of Impero for today. We'll begin in our risk management solution, just give you a very short, very brief idea of, well, how do we actually handle and see risk management in Impero. Then we'll move along and talk still, of course, a bit in light of our control management, but a bit more in depth than what we did with risk management. And then we'll sort of wrap those items up in our report, and we'll talk a little bit about how we can actually control access to, well, both data, but also roles and access rights and so on in user management in the end. So this is the plan for the next 20 minutes or so. So I'll just kick things off here in the risk management section. So what I'll see here, and it's actually divided into a few different areas. So of course, what I see here is just an overview of the different risk directories that we have applied here for this environment here. But we also have an entity tab where you can create all of the different departments or all of the different entities within your company. So in this case here, we've just added a few. There are these 5 here. And on each of these, I can also decide, well, who should have access to these entities here. A bit more on that in a second. So the risk itself here are divided into 2. So one being on the first part being the risk directory. So this is essentially where we create all of the processes, create the sub processes as well, and in the end we will define a risk. And a risk in Impero consists of a name, a description. You can decide whether it's a global or a local risk. We can provide as per default some financial statement assertions and objectives. This section here can be modified into whatever framework that you're using, so it sort of suits the business framework that you already have in place. Then we decide, well, where does this risk actually apply? Again, this is a global risk, so it's a bit more of a top-down approach. So we jump here to the entity tab. We can see that there are already a few entities applied, but essentially I can select from the entity tab I showed initially, say, well, does this risk apply only for Impero AS, DK, and SE, or does it also is it also available for our German entity? Well, then I can select on that as well. I can do this as I did here on the individual risk, but it's also possible to assign an entire process or sub-process to a risk as well. So all the new items that you will create beneath this level will automatically be assigned. So this is basically it for the risk directory as a whole. This is where you define your processes, create your sub-processes. In the end, of course, populate all of your risks and assign them to the different entities. If we go back to the risk management overview here, then we basically jump into the second aspect. So how do we actually assess these risks? And I'll just use the same framework here again, and we can see that if we have a look at our financial risk from before, I think it was this CM2 bank deposits here that we had a look at, we can see that it actually applies here 4 different times, one for each of the entities that we assigned this risk to. So now this is because I have access to all of the 5 entities that we saw before. Of course, a more real-life example might be that, well, I only have access to maybe one. Let's just say the newly provided German entity here. So basically, of course, without setting this filter here, all I will be able to see are all of the risks that has been assigned to the entity that I'm in charge of. What I'll then have to do is that I will click on the link, on the risk here, and I can see all the details that's inherent from the risk directory where we saw the risk was being populated before. What I can then do is that I can set my inherent impact and likelihood. Let's just say, well, if we don't do anything, then the impact is high, and the likelihood for this action here to occur or this risk here is highly likely. When that's done, we can provide a response. So what do we actually want to do about this risk here? Because we can mass assign them, we have a not applicable option. It could be that we transfer them via insurance or similar. It could be that we simply just try to avoid the risk. Maybe we accept that we have it, but might be too low or too costly to actually be worthwhile doing anything about. Or we can, as the option that we use the most, select reduce. When we select reduce, we'll see this little subsection here where we can add a mitigating control. I'll just use a CM2 here as an example. I'll get a lot more into how this control here is designed in a second. I can add the control. Of course, I can add multiple controls here, and multiple controls or the same control can also mitigate multiple risks. When I've done that, I can say, well, the impact might still be the same, but the likelihood has now been reduced from highly likely to unlikely because we do this action. Sorry, remove this one here. So this is basically just the rough idea of how risk management in Impero works. There are room for a lot of customizable options here. So if you work with a 3x3 or a 4x4 scale, then we can adapt to that. Maybe you have some additional measurements like a risk score or risk owner or a third option. Then we can also do that. But here I can basically have my overview of the risk that now it's for the German entity here, so I can toggle back and forth between the inherent and the residual view. Yeah, let's leave it at the risk management here for now. We have done and will continue to do risk management specific webinars at a later point where we can show you some of these customizable options.
Brilliant.
Let's
Thank
jump.
you, Morten.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
One quick note before we go to the control management module. As Morten was demonstrating, there is a link between the risk management module to the control management module. It doesn't, however, mean that you have to work with the risk management module in order to work with the control management module. What we see a lot of our clients doing is actually start within the control management module, and then as and when they mature and the ambitions are getting bigger, then they also start working with the risk management module. So Morten, if you can take us to the control management module and show how it can basically help our clients get these automated compliance processes that they would like.
Yeah, let's jump into that. So let's just enter the control management section here, and again, this is just a slightly different view than what I saw on my dashboard, but essentially it shows the same. So here I can see all the control programs that I have access to, and I'll just use here the financial control program here as an example. But no matter if it's within finance, within tax, within IT, or compliance as a whole, well, then it's basically the same solution that you'll use, and it's the same elements. There might be some slight modifications that you want to do, but it'll all be on the same engine. But let's just dive into the financial control programs here. As mentioned, there are 23 controls, I think, within here. I'll just use the one we used before here, our bank reconciliation as an example. Again, they all have the same elements. So within our create control or edit an existing control screen here, as what we see here, we have basically 4 sections. So we have the basic details. That's what you see on the screen right now. We have a scheduling part, as you can see, pops up next. Then we have an assignment section, and in the end, we'll have the design. I'll just very briefly walk you through the basics of these 4 different elements. So the basic details here, we have a name, we have a bit more of an in-depth description here. a control would have to be placed in a control program, whether it's an already existing one or you want to populate a new one, you can do that as well. And then we work with something that we call tags in Impero. So essentially, these are measures that we would like to either filter upon or be able to group our data upon to make it easier to find our results in the future. So if we know that, well, our auditors will always come and ask us for our key controls, and they want them to be split by whether they are detective or preventive, then we can actually do that because we have the information in place already. The real powerful thing here is that, again, as Impero is in general, it's very, very flexible. So you can actually create your own categories using your own tags to make it fit these unique areas that you are within, or the different areas that you actually want to report within that might be quite unique for the business that you're in. So we can actually do that, and we can use them as dimensions in our reporting later on. I'll show you that in the reporting section as well. Then we are to decide, well, how often do we want to do this control here? So that could be that, well, it's a recurring control, meaning that, well, it will fall within the schedule that we set here. It can be everything from, well, monthly, quarterly, so on. Let's just use monthly here as an example and say, well, we want to do this control every month on the 5th business day after the end of the month. So right now, as we speak, we are at the end of October, meaning that the next due date that we calculate here will be the 5th of November. We just use our own company calendar here at Impero for our business days. But if you have a company calendar similar, we can add that as well. Then for the notification settings that we set here, and I'll just set this to 4. This is, well, when do we actually want to notify the user that they have a pending action? And this is also the time where we create the control in Impero. So with the given setup here, if I was the one responsible to submit this control here, well, then on the 1st of November, I'll receive an email that I have a pending task, and I have up until the 5th of November to actually submit it. Of course, this is a bit as setting a control template. So now we have set it as monthly. So every month on the 1st, we would populate a new one, and of course the periods will change accordingly as well. Then we are at, well, who is actually supposed to do this control here? And we actually have quite a few options here, and I'll just focus on some of them here for today. So let's just say that it was actually me that was responsible for this control here. And as soon as I select the name, you'll see this drawer here on the right side that, well, Morten is supposed to be responsible. Then we can add a reviewer, that could be Shanne. And we could even add a second reviewer if needed. What this actually means here is that, well, I'll receive a control when I have submitted it. We'll come back to the details here next. Then it will go to review at Shanne, and she can then, while either reject it, then it will go back to me, and I'll have to adjust and resubmit, or she can approve it. And then if there's a second reviewer, it will go to that second reviewer, and then him or her can then, well, either send it back to the reviewer all the way back to responsible, or approve the control. So this way we'll sort of have a 6 eyes principle, you could say. So we have a responsible, we have a first reviewer, and we have a second reviewer. Both the reviewer and the second reviewer are optional. So we could actually just see, well, we will just go with the reviewer here for this user here. Another option is that we can actually say, well, we don't have like a user per se that's responsible. We actually work with user groups. So now I just have a user group here that's labeled finance managers. As you can see here, we have 2 different options. I'll just focus on the group feature here for today. Basically, this means that this group here consists of 3 users, Jacob, myself, and Thomas. And all of us will actually be presented with this control. So we would receive a notification on the 1st of November that we have a pending action. But as soon as one of us has submitted the action, of the control, or then it will be removed from everyone's task list. So essentially, it's a bit more if you work in groups in teams, then we can use this option here that we have. And it could be that, well, for the finance managers here, we don't have an approval flow, so we could just leave this here for now. So with this setup, we would actually each month populate 2 perfectly identical controls, one for me and one for the finance managers, and both of them would actually have to be submitted. And in order for us, and again for reporting purposes, to distinguish these from each other, then we actually use these tags once again. We call this part here assignment tags. So it could be that, well, Morten here, he's actually supposed to do this control, but he's supposed to do it for, let's say, company 100, whereas the finance managers are supposed to do the exact same action here for company 200. So essentially, it's all the same. We'll have to do all the tags we had at the beginning here. I'll just scroll back up. They will count for both of these controls here, but one of them will be for company 100 and the other one will be for company 200. There's a lot of flexibility here, as you can see, and you can opt a bit in and out of whether you'll need an approval flow or not. And this can also be tailored from control to control. The final part here is, we tend to call it the heart of the control, but it's basically the design. So what's actually expected from the control performers in order for them to actually submit the control. And we see this little gray area here a bit as a questionnaire, and then we have these answering types, as you can see here on the right side. So the first one we have here, it's a radio button, meaning that you can only answer one option. So here, as an example, we have a title, we have some in-depth instruction. We can actually be quite precise here of what we actually need. We can even link to SharePoints or intranets or similar. We can add a file. This is like a template, as you can see. It's my example here. It could be a hard copy of an SOP or something like that. And then we decide, well, should the user, what should he or she be able to answer? In this case here, you can confirm, or you can say not confirm. Then we might want some documentation in return, and for this we're using the attach file element here. And again, we can provide a title. We can even do an in-depth instruction here again on, well, what do we actually need? Maybe we could actually also attach an example of what does good look like. Well, how does the documentation look? And again, we can make this required. We can submit without uploading anything. But we can also make it based on a condition that we will only display or show this element here if we, up in our confirm button here, actually answered confirm. And what that means is that for the ones who would submit the action here, they will, as I've mentioned a few times, they'll receive an email. They'll click on a link. They'll come to a page that more or less looks like what we'll see here. We can see all the basic details, the title, the instructions, what we are to do here. The design, I can download the template if needed. Then I can say, well, I confirm. Then I'll be asked to attach my supporting documentation, do an additional comment here if needed, and then I can self-evaluate whether this has been effective or not. And then that's basically it. Now I can submit here in the preview, but that's actually it for the control performance. So just to touch very briefly about these, they'll receive an email, click on a link, do whatever we have defined here on the screen, hit submit, and then that's basically it. Then they're out of the system again. So it's very easy to implement. It's also very easy for the ones for the control performers. Basically, there should be no surprises here. It should be items that they're already familiar with. Yeah, time's running a bit. Shannon, do you have any additional things, or should we jump to the reporting section?
I have answered a few questions directly, so I think for now we're good. But yeah, basically, I hope you can see how simple it is to, first of all, as an administrator, to basically create the control, but even more simple, even more easy for a control performer to perform the control. Simply receiving an email, clicking on a link, and only being presented with the questions that you need to basically provide an answer to. So thank you, Morten, and let's go to the reporting module.
And now we've focused a lot on well, how to actually set things up and how to actually assign them to multiple users, and that's of course with the onboarding process and the first part of the usage of Impero, that's of course quite a big portion of the time. But when everything has actually been uploaded and set into place, then it's actually the reporting section that will sort of be your everyday work tool. And I'll just pull out an example here of just a basic country report. It's essentially based on the tags that we also did before. But it's actually a way for me to get an overview of the items for the different control programs that I have access to. Once again, here we use our tags quite a lot for this. So now I can actually see that, well, there has been sent out for the period of September, so for the previous period. There's been 32 controls. We've submitted 30 of them. There's still a few that's overdue. And even though we've actually completed all of them, then a great proportion of them has actually been submitted after the due date, so we have a fairly low on-time rate. This can be split based on all of these different tags. So now it's country here. We also used company. Oh, sorry, here we also used company before. So it's quite easy to if I could hit the right button here. Yeah, it's actually quite easy to get the overview and to get the overview that you need. And of course, in a chart like this, you can only look at one item at a time. But in our table here below, we can actually, a bit like a pivot table in Excel, we can actually tip a bit more with the data. So we say, okay, all right, within Denmark, we have these different entities here. We can see that they have been presented with these controls and who was actually responsible. And all of these numbers here, I can click on these. So for instance, I can click on these 2 overdue here. I could either send a manual reminder or reassign them to a different user. This is just to say we can actually do quite a lot here. We can give you the overview that you need, and it can be done rather easily.
Brilliant. And last but not least, there is a bit of administration in terms of we have some, say, performers who are off sick or on maternity leave or on holidays. How can we easily manage and redelegate these tasks to other colleagues?
Yeah, so one option is, of course, to do it by the status report that I just showed before. This will only move the current action, so it will not edit anything on the current setup. But let's just dive into a user. I'll just use myself here as an example. But essentially, if you are a user and administrator or an administrator, you can do this on every single user. And the key part here is the subsection access and assignments. I'll just focus on a few of these for now. So I can see, for instance, on direct control assignments, I'm actually currently either as a responsible or as a reviewer assigned to any one different controls. So if I leave the company, if I change position, then we can actually just mass assign all the tasks for one user and hit replace, and then replace the user with a new one. And it will, that might be, now it's in one program here, but it might be across multiple different control programs, and it will just swap them out. If there are any assignment tags, then these will also be swapped. The same things goes here for the pending activities. So these are for the controls that has already been sent. Again, we can replace the user here if there's someone else that should do it. Again, the key part here is it's fairly easy, it's fairly simple, and user management is not a big obstacle.
Brilliant. Thank you, Morten. So that was today's walkthrough of Impero, all of the modules, a bit about the user management. So essentially, how we can support you and your company with automating your compliance processes, but also managing your risks and designing controls that are embedded in your day-to-day work. For those of you who have not had their questions answered, I will reach out to you directly after this webinar. On Tuesday, the 2nd of November at 1 p.m. Danish time, we'll host our next webinar, which will also include some of our new features, for example, the 4-hour review that Morten spoke briefly about today. So we hope you found today's session insightful and helpful, and we're looking forward to welcoming you on the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.